In the meantime, it gives me great pleasure to reintroduce Holly Putnam. Her dog Rosie also likes to chew tennis balls as well. And she's going to talk to us about a really important issue of sanitation and disinfection. Now, just quickly, a good opportunity also to thank our platinum sponsors, Nestle Purina Pet Care, for making this possible. If you have a question, please type it into Slido so that we can ask in the panel session at the end. Thank you, Holly.
Good morning, everybody. Everybody can hear me okay in the back? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm going to warn you guys, I feel like cleaning and disinfection is a relatively boring topic. You know, a lot of chemistry and chemicals and things like that, but it's such an important one. So it's something that whether you're working in a shelter or a rescue, foster homes as well, spay-neuter clinics, this all has application within your organization. So I'll try to keep it as entertaining as possible, but I'm not making any promises. Okay. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to keep using the word shelter, but again, it's going to apply to whatever type of organization that you're running. So in this particular slide, it says, why are shelters unique? This would be true for spay-neuter clinics and rescues as well. But it is a unique population and something that we really have to think about when we're trying to think about how we're going to clean and, more importantly, disinfect our environments in shelters. And one of the main components is that we have such a transient and diverse population that are coming into our facilities. So there's animals that are, as Rose Marie said, they are, you know, day-old kittens, and or to the opposite extreme, we may have adult animals that are having some sort of infectious disease that maybe it's not showing itself yet. So the animal might not be symptomatic, or it may be symptomatic. We also have senior animals and animals that are immune compromised. So little puppies and kittens, their immune systems tend not to be fully developed until they're closer to adulthood. But if an animal is sick, their immune system is compromised as well. And that may not be something that they're sick from an infectious disease, but maybe they have some sort of systemic something going on that makes them more susceptible to anything that they're going to come across. In addition to having such a mixture of animals, we have this transient population where animals are constantly coming and constantly going. So one day we may have a relatively stable population where everybody seems to be on the same page as far as infectious disease, and the next day something can walk in that is either susceptible or that is shedding some type of organism. So it's constantly changing, and we just always have to keep that in mind. And then with shelters and any type of animal welfare facility, there's often a lack of knowledge surrounding cleaning and disinfection as far as what appropriate products to use, what products kill which organisms, and which may be contributing to even higher disease rates. There are some that can do that. And also, there's often facilities and organizations don't know what their disease rate even is. So if you're not keeping track of data in that respect, you may think, oh, we have a really, hardly any cases of parvovirus. But if you were tracking your data, you may discover actually, at any given time, 25% of the dogs that come in did not have parvo, and now they did. And so that's something that I think, as protectors of animals, is something that's so important to us that we never want animals to come into our facility who are healthy and then end up sick. There are going to be some animals that happens to only because they were already sick when they came in, but they weren't symptomatic at the time, so they weren't showing symptoms. But that should be a really, really small percentage. So we never want to do harm to animals by exposing them to pathogens that are going to make them sick, or worse yet, that they die from that. There's also a lot of staff turnover at our organizations. This could be a whole nother topic and discussion that could actually take up the entire day as to why that is. But as you guys know, this is hard work that we do. It's not for everybody. And a lot of people come in, to our organizations and they want to make a difference, but they quickly realize that this might not be for them with all of the difficult things that we see, or the outcomes are not exactly what they were hoping for, Or, we have in the States, we have a lot of young people that come to work for us that are just out of high school. Sometimes they are high schoolers. If you use volunteers, those people are very young in their profession, or volunteers aren't guaranteed to stay. So you may have everybody trained and on the same page and have lots of knowledge, and then they move on for whatever reason, and that knowledge can go with them. So as I'm talking, I just wanted to clarify, I'm going to be using the words clean and disinfect. And clean is exactly what you think about when you clean your own house or tidying up. But disinfection is going to be using something to kill bacteria and viruses. Okay. And as we go along, I just want to point out that we cannot disinfect organic matter. So pee and poop, things like vomit, all that sort of thing, we're not going to be able to disinfect it. We can sterilize it if we attempted to. You can kill bacteria and viruses that are in it. But with the products that we're talking about, we're not going to be able to clean and we're not going to be able to disinfect that. And I bring that up because every single place I have worked, including Emancipet, I'm embarrassed to say, there have been employees who are cleaning like a litter box in a tub, and they throw their dishes in there, like their own personal dishes that they ate off of, or their cup. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that, but I'm like, what are you guys thinking? That just grosses me out so much. And people don't seem to get it. And when I say, when I tease them, but being meaningful about it, they're like, well, there's the disinfectant in there. It doesn't work like that. So as we go along, I'm going to keep telling you guys that we have to clean the areas first, but this is particular for organic matter because there are lots of zoonotic diseases that can be passed in bodily fluids and feces that we can get. Okay, so there's various types of disinfection that can happen. There is a physical type, which includes UV, heat, desiccation. So like you could use, you guys have such high amounts of sunshine here, you guys could put things out in the yard and let the sun kill bacteria and viruses. Sometimes you'll see shelters, which I think is a good idea, to use steam occasionally to really to kill spores and things like that. But in general, your daily use that we're going to be using for disinfections is going to go under the category of chemical disinfections, and that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation. So as we're thinking about which products we want to use, we actually want to start by making a plan as to how we're going to use these products and how we need to use them appropriately. So we also want to think about the safety to the animals and safety to our staff, because these are chemicals and they can have detrimental effects on both the pets that we're trying to care for and the people who are using them. And then we also need to think about the type of surface that we're applying these to. And this is something that I think a lot of us don't take into consideration when we start cleaning and disinfecting, but we are going to have all types of surfaces in shelters. So that's going to be important to keep in mind. And so the ideal surface for any type of disinfectant is going to be one that is flat and non-porous, and even better yet, if it's sealed. But when you think about your own facilities, particularly foster homes, that's probably a very small percentage of the types of surfaces that are in your buildings, in your facilities. The ideal product would have a whole bunch of check marks along it, which would be something that is non-toxic but affordable, something that's not corrosive, so it's not going to eat away at finishes and materials, something that doesn't stain as well, so that aesthetically our facilities still look nice. And again, I always think about foster homes. If we're recommending various disinfectants, we for sure would not want to use anything that would stain somebody's home. Ideally, this ideal product would have detergent activity too, so the cleaning aspect of that. So there's some products out there that are just cleaners, and then there's some that are just disinfectants, but there are a couple that will do both, and so that would be really nice to have. And then, of course, we want the product to be effective, so if it could have as wide a range of antimicrobial activity as possible, that would be fantastic. Okay. This is where it's going to get real boring, but this is super important for you guys to hang in there through. We're going to go through 5 different groups of disinfectants that products will fall into. They're going to either be alcohols or quaternary ammonium compounds. They could be an accelerated hydrogen peroxide or fall into a group called hypochlorites. And then this last one I always have to say slowly, but it's a common group. It's potassium peroxymonosulfate. And I'm going to go through each one. So alcohols, this is what we're talking, rubbing alcohol, hand sanitizers, this is what we're referring to. And alcohol is actually a relatively good disinfectant. It disrupts the cell membrane of organisms, and it does have a pretty broad spectrum of activity. It's fairly non-toxic, but you guys already know, I'm sure you've all had experience with rubbing alcohol in particular, but even hand sanitizers, they can be quite irritating to our skin. You have a cut that burns like crazy. If you smell it, that's irritating to your nose. God forbid you got anything in your eye. So this would not be appropriate to use on a wide-scale basis in your facilities because of that. In all likelihood, it probably wouldn't be the animals that experience that necessarily because it evaporates so quickly, but for your staff members and your volunteers who are applying this, this is not going to be the most pleasant product to work with. And it actually is quite corrosive to rubber and plastic. So at Emancipet, we save rubbing alcohol for uses like on our pulse ox, the clip that goes on the tongue, we'll do a quick swipe with alcohol in between patients because it evaporates quickly and it's such a small amount that we're using. So we feel good about that. We do use hand sanitizers in between our patients for our healthy pet clinics. So those are our wellness clinics as well. Quaternary ammonium compounds, this is the largest category of cleaning products that is available to us. And these are things like, and I apologize, I don't know if we have the exact same products in Australia as we do in the US, but household cleaners like 409, Fantastics, is something that you would clean your bathroom with. So not bleach, bleach doesn't fall into this category, but your daily cleaners, those are quaternary ammonium compounds. And so the nice thing is they do have some detergent activity, so you could use it to clean the environment. And they are not very corrosive because, again, they're meant for your household. So, they obviously, you wouldn't want them to eat away at your kitchen countertops or something like that. And the other thing that people like about them is they tend to be quite affordable. They're pretty good at killing bacteria, and you'll often see that on the container that it kills like 99.9% of household bacteria, but they're not good for viruses. And this has been somewhat of a misnomer in some ways because on that last picture, I don't know if it's oh, you can see that. Okay, this product is called Parvasol. Do you have this here, or did you use it at one time in Australia? This was really common to use years ago. I started working for a vet when I was 16, so that was almost 30 years ago. And we used Parvasol, and we were like, oh, we're good, if Parvo comes in, because we have the product that has Parvasol right on it. But it turns out that quaternary ammonium compounds are not good for viruses, particularly those that are unenveloped viruses, such as parvovirus. So we have to be careful of that. So watch the name when you're picking a product and make sure that you know what type of category this goes into. So if it's a quaternary ammonium, I wouldn't particularly use that for any type of virus in your shelter. It's also not effective against ringworm. So that's something to be aware of as well. Okay, the third type of disinfectant that's available are accelerated hydrogen peroxides. And in the US, this is available as Rescue, and it used to be Excel. How about this? Do you guys have these products in Australia? Okay. It started off in human medicine in the US, so if you don't have it available to you as a veterinary product, you probably could look and see if you could get a hold of it through human medical distributors. But the nice thing about this is it's completely non-toxic because all it is what it says, accelerated form of hydrogen peroxide. So when it breaks down, it essentially breaks down into water, which is very nice for your the safety within your facility and also the environment around your facility too. It's a little bit corrosive, but not extremely It is expensive though, so this is something that, you know, all the shelters at home, they all love this product and they would love to have it on hand or use it widespread throughout their shelter, but it's often the cost of it is a limiting a factor. And it is very effective against viruses. The jury's still out as to whether it's effective against ringworm, but so bacteria and viruses, this is a nice product to use. Just so you know, it's not inactivated by organic matter, meaning that if an animal had like urinated in the cage and you spray this on there with the urine in there and the urine had dried, the product is still going to work. So you'll be able to clean a little bit through the detergent activity, but it's not something that you want to say, I still wouldn't use this like in your bucket when put your food in there, your food dishes and that sort of thing. So I'd still be really careful about that. This also has quite a long shelf life too. So when we get to bleach, you'll see that has a short shelf life, that's a tongue twister. But this one will last for quite a while. Okay, and speaking of bleach, bleach falls in the category of sodium hypochlorite. Bleach is a really nice option because it's so affordable, it's so accessible too. You can run right down to your grocery store or your drugstore and pick that right up. And it's very effective. It has a really broad spectrum of antimicrobial activity. However, you guys know, I'm sure you've had experience in your life, that bleach is corrosive. It bleaches fabric, so it can cause quite a bit of destruction in that sense. There's also quite a bit of confusion about dilution because not all bleach is made up the same. If you go to the store, you might see one that has one dilution on it and another bottle that has a completely different dilution. That was new to me. I didn't know that. Like growing up, I just was like, you know, up until recently, until I got involved in shelter medicine, I didn't realize that there were different concentrations of bleach. So that is something to be aware of. And then you need to re-dilute it to the dilution that you need for your facility. So definitely something to be aware of. Also something that is extremely important, I've had personal experience with this at shelters that I've helped. Bleach can be extremely dangerous when it's accidentally mixed with other products. We had a situation back home in New York it's probably about 2 years ago, where somebody accidentally tried to mix lime sulfur in a bucket that had previously had bleach in it, and it still had a little bit of bleach, and then there was like this gas that came out, and widespread panic throughout the shelter. The fire department showed up, Cornell University was called, and they were like, okay, there's animals that are dying. The whole situation honestly got blown out of proportion. Animals didn't die, but it was a scary situation. And even if it wasn't that gases were produced, you know, if you're using lime sulfur for ringworm and you accidentally mix it up with a little bit of bleach, that's going to be extremely irritating to the cat that you apply. So that's something to keep in mind. Another type of hypochlorite is calcium hypochlorite, and the brand name back in the US is Wissy Wash, as an example of that. This is nice because similarly to bleach, it is effective against unenveloped viruses, so parvovirus is an example of that. And it comes in a variety of ways to dispense it, so you can get it like in a powder form and mix it up into little squirt bottles, or there are hose attachments, so you can use that to spray kennels down. And it's pretty quick. It works pretty fast, so it only needs about 2 to 4 minutes of application for it to do its job. Hypochlorites, again, this is going to be both types, so bleach and the calcium hypochlorite, which is Wissy Wash. They're effective against viruses at the dilution of 1 to 32, and this is really important to pay attention to because the correct dilution is going to mean that it's doing its job, but again, this is also important for both the animals, the safety of the animals, and the staff members who are using it. I remember a long time ago when I was a teenager working for this veterinarian, I think it was Parvusol. It came in a big gallon jug and it had a pump on it. And I was filling up a bucket, and I was just going to town on that pump, like going crazy, because I was thinking the more that was in there, the better it was. And the vet, and I have been doing this actually for months, and he finally saw me, and he was like, whoa, 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 you know, and he was all upset. just worried that, my hands could have gotten irritated or ulcerated, or the animals, there could have been a respiratory irritant to that as well. It's effective against bacteria at that same dilution, 1 to 32. And then it's also effective against ringworm, but at a stronger concentration. You have to dilute it to 1 to 10 for that. Both types of hypochlorites are inactivated by organic material. So if there's any poop, any vomit, any snot from the nose, it's not going to do its job. You have to get rid of all of that first. And then there is a bleach calculator link available. I think I included it on the notes for this particular talk that you guys will receive, that you can go online and it'll help you figure out how to calculate the dilution for the bleach that you purchase. So you'd go to the store, look at what type of dilution it is that on your bottle, and then you can put that into your bleach calculator and know how many cups to add to the amount of water. The potassium peroxymonosulfates, this group includes things like trifectant and Vircon are the brand names of the disinfectants in this group. These can be a little bit expensive, they can be a little bit corrosive, but they are effective against viruses, not so much against ringworm. And I put mildly inactivated by organic matter, but I would just consider it not usable with organic matter. I wouldn't take the risk. And there is some detergent activity for various products. Okay. This is a really nice resource if you've never seen or used it before. This is available at aspcapro.org. And if you just search the bar that the disinfectant reference chart, you would find this come up. And it's a really nice condensed version of all the things I told you, because it is confusing. This is a lot of information to take in just a few minutes. But it helps you determine, what product you have and what will it be effective against and relative cost, that sort of thing. All right, so now we have our products under our belt. We're going to talk about the actual cleaning process. And infectious agents are passed through various ways in the shelter, but probably the most significant one is through fomites. And for those of you who don't know that term, a fomite is typically an inanimate object that can pass, that can transfer an infectious organism from one animal to another. So in the shelter, it is really anything, but the number one fomite is our own hands, so something that is animate and alive. And you can imagine how easily this could happen. We're petting animals, we're doing exams on them, we're touching their bowls, even their cages, things like that. So it would be so easy for us to touch some sort of infectious agent and pass it along to the animal, in the cage next to it or on the other side of the shelter. But it's not just hands, it's everything that comes into contact with animals. So these are things like their bowls, their blankets, leashes, toys, furniture. So if you have cats, if you do communal cat rooms and they're free to roam around, if you use upholstered furniture or wooden scratching posts, things like that, those can absolutely hold on to infectious agents, and the next cat that comes over can use that. Litter boxes, that's another thing that could potentially be a fomite. Laundry is another one that we often don't think about, and I have just a little story to help remind you how important it is to think outside the box, these types of things. At a shelter that, when I worked at Cornell, we used a local shelter as our clinical teaching platform, and it was pretty small. It only had an annual intake of about 2,000 animals. But we had lots of volunteers and lots of dedicated, well-meaning people volunteering for us, and we would adopt out FIV positive kitties from the shelter. And we had one gentleman who was a volunteer who, so if they were FIV positive, we didn't put them in a communal cat room because we just didn't have enough of them at a time to dedicate a whole room to them. So unfortunately, they were housed in smaller, in cages, not small cages, but they usually didn't get a whole lot of floor time. But he felt this cat needed to have floor time. It was a kitty who had a big personality. It was a real sweetheart. So he thought, oh, you know what? Nobody's using the laundry room. I'll just put the cat in the laundry room and let him, hang out in there for pretty much the whole day, and we'll put him up at the end of the night or whenever, the adoption floor is open. But like many shelters, this one had trouble keeping up with their laundry. So there were just piles and piles of laundry all over the laundry. It was probably like as big as the stage, and truly almost every spot on the floor would have a pile of dirty laundry. And so the laundry is dirty, and it's from everywhere within the shelter. And one day we walked by as the group of veterinarians, and we didn't realize this was happening because also, like many shelters, I don't know if you guys experience this, communication can be a challenge in shelters. So what's happening in one area doesn't always, not everybody hears about it. So we just discovered this as we were doing our daily rounds. The laundry room was all glass, and we could see right in there. And it was a really cute sight. The cat was asleep on a pile of dirty laundry. But we thought, oh my gosh, of all animals to go into the laundry room and be exposed to every type of whatever that, is in there, that was the wrong animal to put in there. So, and it was just a lack of education. The guy, he meant well, he thought he was doing a really great thing. And if it wasn't the actual laundry room, that would have been a great thing. So, so we quickly had to change that. So things like that, laundry, could be a great example of a fomite. So what we do to help protect ourselves and prevent ourselves from being a fomite is we need to wear personal protective equipment. And this is something that I find is probably one of the biggest challenges to get consistency and compliance within our staff members, and at any level or any sector of animal sheltering. So spay-neuter clinics too. People are like, oh, I don't want to put on personal protective equipment, but this works. This is a physical shield for you and your staff members, and also for the animals too. So one of the biggest ones would be gloves. And that is something that we advise wearing and changing your gloves between handling every single patient. And also be aware about how you take your gloves off. So I don't have a pair to show you, but if you imagine I had rubber gloves on, and say I pulled one off, and now my hand is free, this hand is dirty. If I just take my clean hand and go like this, well, now this clean hand is no longer clean. It has, whatever infectious agent on it. So teaching your staff to be careful about how they change their gloves. So you want to take it by the cuff, or in this case, if I have both hands covered, you can take it by the fingers of one hand, but once you have your clean hand, you really need to either slip your fingers under the dirty glove or be real careful that you're just catching the rim of the glove so that you're not contaminating your hands. And I can tell Australians are very environmentally conscious, or it appears that way anyhow, during the few days that I've been here. We are too back home, and I have to admit it kind of kills me inside because, who was it? Kristen said her shelter has an annual intake of 22,000 animals. That's a whole heck of a lot of gloves that you're, changing and as you're doing intake or cleaning. So an alternative to that is some people will put on a pair of gloves and they will use hand sanitizer between the animals, and not changing the gloves. They'll do it right on top. Other ideas are, if the gloves bother you, if you were to wear them long enough, you could just do hand sanitizer between animals. And having done that, that does dry out my hands a little bit, but or washing in between animals too. So that's just using soap and water. Those are other options as well. But it is so important because, as I really can't stress enough, just because an animal looks healthy in front of you doesn't mean that it doesn't have something going on, and it could potentially be shedding something. Our clothes as well. This is another area that shelter staff at home don't really appreciate, or don't love, I should say. Having layers or various clothing for various sectors of the shelter is very important. So, for instance, if you are going into an isolation area where animals are sick, you would want to have some sort of smock on that you could remove when you leave. So, because no doubt you're going to have something that falls on your shirt, or even hairs are floating around, especially for cats. They're going to stick to your shirt, so you want to have something that you can take off as you leave that isolation area. This would be true for dogs, so this is an example of like coveralls that you could just zip out of when you're finished cleaning the dog kennels. But personal protective equipment also involves eye protection, even ventilators, things like that. That would be to an extreme, but we tend to have like women who are pregnant, and if they're working in shelters and using chemicals, they'll use a ventilator for that. Order of cleaning is extremely important as well. This is something to always remember. So it makes sense as we talk about it, but we often forget about it when we're in a hurry in our shelters. You want to start with your youngest, cleaning and handling your youngest, most susceptible patients. So if your shelter has a kitten nursery, that's where you want to start your cleaning process that day. That's where you want to start your daily rounds and your feeding and things like that, and then work to your your oldest, most infectious patients, which would probably be like your isolation area where you're treating sick patients. As far as cleaning, there are actual ways to where you can do just spot cleaning, and this is something that we recommend in the US on a daily basis. You can just, rather than pulling every single animal out and doing like a really deep, thorough cleaning of their enclosure, spot cleaning is perfectly acceptable. That's just where you're like dusting up the food that they got out of their bowl and the litter that came out of the litter box, changing out their dirty blankets, things like that. But it's essentially leaving the animal in the enclosure if you can. So like porthole cages, you would put them on the other side, or you just remove the dog quickly from the cage, not for a long period of time, and put them back. Okay, I'm going to go through this. All right, we kind of already talked about that. Spot cleaning. Okay. As far as cleaning goes, we also recommend trying to keep the routine the same every single day so that that's less stressful for the animals, because if they can kind of predict what's going to happen to them while they're in the shelter, that can go a long way. So trying to make it happen at the same time every day and in the same manner will hopefully keep their stress levels down. I wanted to get to this outbreak protocol because it's best we try to do it sometimes, no matter how hard you try. Well, and absolutely, there's just pathogens out in the environment, and sometimes you're just not going to be able to prevent them from coming into your facility. And so there are going to be times where you may potentially have an outbreak happen, and this is when you want to do a really deep overhaul cleaning of your facilities. So you want to remove the animals, do a super deep, thorough cleaning, and make sure that you get everything under control as best as you can for that. Don't be afraid to throw things away. So if you have upholstered furniture and you have an outbreak going on, if you have wooden cat structures, those things you're probably going to have to part with, because they absolutely can be holding on to infectious pathogens in the little defects and in between the fabric as well. Ooh, let me go back. This is true for litter pans. That is notorious for pathogens getting into the little scratch marks that cats will make. And so some shelters will use disposable litter pans across the board. Some will save it for their most susceptible populations, like kittens, for instance, or animals with diarrhea. They'll use them, disposable litter boxes, instead of your standard ones. I also wanted to point out, in case you weren't aware, we have found that foot baths are not the way to go. So that would be, where you have water and you put your disinfectant in there, and then usually people will just step in it and then they move on. In order for foot baths to really work, you're supposed to stand in that for 10 minutes up to your treads. For at least 1 minute up to your treads of your shoes. And so you think like, oh, 1 minute, that's not so bad. But actually, if you have to stand there and stand there for 1 minute, it feels like an eternity. So it's much less likely that people are going to be compliant with this type of method. And so we advise foot covers in order to do that, or dedicated boots. That's another thing you could do. And then I also just wanted to remind you to also remember to think about vehicles that your sheltering facility might be using. So we call, as Krista mentioned, animal control officers will have often their own vehicle, or a transport vehicle is another example. if you have an animal that comes in that is sick in that vehicle, and then the animal control officer does whatever he needs to do with that animal, but then brings another one right in without cleaning, now that new animal is exposed to it. And this would be true for wildlife too. So raccoons can spread distemper as well, and that's something that we often don't think about. So it's just something to be aware of. And then as a facility, you should also keep track of how you're doing, and I have various types of ways that you could potentially test yourselves, that's with diagnostics like bacterial or ringworm cultures, even PCR. But really paying attention to your disease rates is probably one of the most practical ways to go about doing that. And so if you're seeing, at least if you're not seeing your disease rates go up, but better yet, if you're seeing your disease rates drop, that would be an indication that you're doing, the protocols that you put into place are doing a good job with. Okay. Foster homes. Well, let me just say, because we have a lot of people who are interested in foster here. So foster homes can be a tricky situation because often, they're home settings. And I foster all the time too, and I know I should be keeping those kittens like in my bathroom. I don't do that. I can't resist. My daughters are worse than me. They're all over us. They're with our adult cat. As I'm saying this, I'm like, I can't believe I'm admitting this out loud because that's pretty bad. But I feel like my own cats are pretty healthy, so that's how I justify that. But so if I do that as a veterinarian, the average person is going to do that. As much as we say, keep this kitten confined or puppy confined, they're not going to do that. So it's something to really be aware of, because that if the animal or the puppy or kitten is sick and the foster parent knows it or doesn't know it, either one, they're going to be spreading those pathogens around that person's home where it is filled with all sorts of materials that are difficult to disinfect. Okay, and that's all I have. These are some sources for you. So, thank you.